recording. Do I need to do that again, Carrie? No, okay. We're now recording. At Mount Greylock Regional School District, our mission is to create a community of learners working together in a safe and challenging learning environment that encourages restorative-based processes, respect, inclusive diversity, courtesy, integrity, and responsibility through high expectations and cooperation, resulting in lifelong learning and personal growth. I have a quick policy question that maybe Carrie can answer. Do we need to waive the BGB policy adoption procedure, or because this is a revision, do we not need to do that?
So when it's a new policy, the practice is to do a first read and a second read. You can always vote to waive the first read. I'm not clear when it's a revision to an existing policy, whether there is traditionally a first read and a second read. My understanding is that there is not, but I could be wrong about that.
That was my understanding too. I just wasn't sure. I figured I'd run it by someone. Steve?
I think it's always safer to just say we are voting to waive the second read and just consider this an emergency situation because we have the ability to do that.
I don't know if this qualifies for an emergency situation though. That would be my question.
I've got the policy.
Yeah, so I mean, so we don't know, it doesn't have to be an emergency situation to waive a first read. So if we want just to cover ourselves, we can have a vote to waive the first read of the policy revision so that the second read is the final. Okay.
Does somebody want to make that motion?
I'm happy to make that motion.
Okay. Steve, you seconded?
He did.
Okay, I can't hear him. Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor?
This is just voting on waiving the first read.
Right, yes.
Okay.
All in favor?
Owen, aye.
Conry, aye.
Constantine, aye.
Curtis, I think you're next.
Fred's here.
Green, aye.
Miller, aye.
Okay, great. Thank you. That motion passes. Okay. So what we are discussing the modifications
That's the table. Come sit up here.
of the policy EBCFA face coverings regarding after-school outdoor on-campus activities at Mount Greylock Regional School. So everyone should have the modifications in their packet. And I don't know. So you'll see in the document, the updated DESE guidance and the updated MIAA guidance. And then in the document that we have in our packet, the new language is in green, and then any removed language has the red strike through.
Do you need a motion for the policy and then to discuss it?
Sure.
So I can move to accept the changes as suggested in the document.
Okay. Steve, did you just second? I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Bowen moves, Miller seconds. Discussion. Steve.
So I strongly support aligning our mask policy with DESE's guidelines, but as this is the second time in less than a month that there have been issues with how we've discussed and implemented COVID policies, I want to repeat my concerns about how we're creating our agendas and publicly debating issues in regards to the item today, but also in general. While agendas must be finalized 48 hours in advance, we are allowed to have a standing item that allows us to discuss items not reasonably anticipated by the chair that arise too close to the meeting to have met this deadline. It's a wise policy to have such an item, especially in the COVID era when conditions can change daily or even hourly. The Finance Subcommittee has such an item on all its agendas. And in fact, this was very valuable yesterday when we were able to talk about the impact of some very recent changes on the cost of graduation ceremonies. I have asked in the past that we have such an item on all full committee agendas. The chair has sadly not included it, and I will ask again that going forward, we always have this. There is no good reason not to give us the ability to deal with changing circumstances. Note that just because we can discuss something doesn't mean we will, but it at least gives us the opportunity. Second, on Monday and Tuesday, I asked the chair and the superintendent if the superintendent could align our mask policy with Jesse on his own, or if we needed the school committee to meet. And I requested that if the latter, we have a school committee meeting with this as an agenda item. The chair denied my request and drew up our meeting for today to be solely on wearing masks after school. Not surprisingly, many members in the community were concerned about this and let the committee and administration know. I am glad that we are discussing this item under emergency COVID policy rules, but this is not best practices. We could have had this as an agenda item and chose not to. The chair sets the agenda. The chair is supposed to work with the entire committee. I think the phrase is servant to the assembly. Again, this is not the first time we have had such issues. I am bringing this up so that going forward, we can do better. We illegally passed the travel policy with just one meeting and then selectively enforced an incorrect interpretation and continued to do so even after district council informed us of these errors, and attempts to remedy this at committee meetings were denied multiple times. Today, our agenda explicitly states that we are only to discuss the mask policy for after-school activities, but we are discussing much more. We are doing a disservice to our community by creating agendas and running meetings in ways that minimize all voices being heard. Such actions go against our efforts to create an inclusive environment. Thank you.
Julia?
I wanted to ask a question about the policy.
Mhm.
And it currently says, this is at the bottom of the first page of it, where we've struck out the language when appropriate social distancing is enforced, that used to apply to during mask breaks while eating or drinking. And then there's this added language, right, that's in green. Do we need to still have social distancing for eating and drinking? Like, should that line was struck for all of the below bullet points, but it feels like while eating or drinking should have something that says while appropriate social distancing is enforced.
Thank you. That's a good question.
Joe, do you want to weigh in on that, or would you like me to?
I can. I think my response would be that the policy itself is about face covering, and as opposed to when we will not have social distancing enforced. And previously, the policy, that language, it did apply to those two bullets, but I would argue that we have all kinds of other social distancing practices and rules that are in place that are outside of that. So I don't think we could add it in front of each of those first two bullets, but I don't think it's required, given that the policy is about when you do or do not wear a face covering versus when you do or do not social distance.
And Julia, we have a letter that's ready to go home, assuming that these policy changes are enacted, that reminds families and caretakers that that our expectation for when we're eating outdoors remains that we follow the 6 feet of social distance that we've grown used to.
Steve?
Just as a talk, I do like the language that the masking policy does not apply to mask breaks. I know it had to be there, but it was just a amusing thought to read. Will this be announced on the intercom if it's effective immediately? Will this be communicated to?
It is. The student athletes, and I assume the families of student athletes that will be here as spectators this afternoon, Lindsay or Jake, have they been told to anticipate this, or the coaches are aware
The coaches are aware of the possibility. We didn't send it out to the students because we didn't want the confusion of between now and then and whatnot. So the coaches are aware, but the families have not gotten a direct notification.
Yeah. So and otherwise, so the athletes will find out when they get to their event, and then the letter that will inform families will actually go out probably by 1:30 or 2 o'clock. And then, you know, for the during the school day piece of this, that will take effect on Monday.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Okay, hearing, oh, there's Carrie.
I just have a very
I don't know who
really
had their
brief
hand up
one.
first, Jose.
Sorry, Carrie, you go first.
No, mine was actually just a question. Could we have the statement that Steve read shared with the committee by email? Just because I didn't really have a chance to absorb it and I'd like to think about it for future practice.
Joe, I actually put it in the minutes, but I can also send it out to be distributed.
Yeah, if you could send it to Stacy and have it
Yep.
sent out to the committee, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Jose.
Just a brief question about, I think, Jake, I think in some language that you used, this update by DESE came seemingly out of the blue. And as we start to prepare for what the next academic year looks like, what's your sense about how quickly guidelines from DESE are changing, or will they give superintendents and districts some heads up in terms of, or at least some help in terms of, guidance in terms of how we start planning for what our next academic year looks like?
Wow, I am so afraid to take my bulky self onto this thin ice of answering this. I believe the CDC guidance on masks, or what sufficed for CDC guidance, came out on Thursday or Friday of last week. The governor made an announcement, I believe, on Monday. DESE came out with some guidance that was actually in a frequently asked questions piece on Tuesday. We scheduled this meeting on Wednesday. This was really about as quickly as we could do this, given that this is a local policy, and given that the state handed early on in this process said, you're on your own, localities, to figure this out. Here's some guidance. So, the last conversation that I was a part of with the commissioner, me and 350 other superintendents and district leaders, would indicate that there is some pretty solid guidance for what the fall will look like that can be expected between mid-June to mid-July. I think my best answer would be to expect the unexpected in some ways. We'll do our best to keep up with the changes that sometimes come fast and furious. But we should have some more solid guidance this summer in terms of what end of August, beginning of September look like.
Steve.
I just realized we might not have stated explicitly for the record the authority under which we are doing an expanded conversation, because the agenda only says mask policy after school, and we're doing more than that. So Jake, would you mind just stating for the record why we? Yeah. Thank you.
Yep, I'm happy to say it. So the original agenda item, because there were some people we felt that were whose voices were really important in this conversation before we made a determination about how to follow this during the school day, and that was with our teachers and our other staff, that the agenda needed to go out before we could possibly schedule that conversation. So the agenda reads, that we are discussing this regarding after-school outdoor on-campus activities at Mount Greylock. My request to the school committee today is that under policy EBCS, there is a paragraph that says EBCS, I believe. Yeah, it's EBCS, Steve, emergency plans, interim policy for COVID-19 related issues. So while this is not necessarily an emergency situation, this is where this authority sits in our policy. I don't know where else it sits, or I would have asked for that. But the piece that I'm asking the school committee to grant me today is the superintendent with the advice and consent of the school committee. Notice that does not say a vote of the school committee on a specific item. It says the advice and consent of the school committee, which this body can give even if it's not on an agenda. May suspend or modify individual district policies to address the COVID-19 emergency as declared by the governor. Such suspension of policy shall expire upon the end of the emergency as declared by the governor. So as this is COVID related, and since it's not on the agenda, I am requesting that you grant me the authority to have this entire policy apply not only to after school athletic activities on the Mount Greylock campus, but that it applies to all 3 of our schools before school, during the school day, and after school. Until we are able to go back in our regular June meeting and through an agenda item, vote these same policy changes for our entire operation. Does that make sense to folks?
I'm just saying that, you know, in the future, we should have agendas that give us the flexibility to discuss these. And that's why in the future, I really strongly encourage us to have the 48-hour item and have agenda requests listened to. Thank you.
So is the advice and consent of the school committee part of the vote on the policy that we have on the table right now, or is that a separate conversation?
I think failing to, you know, the advice is simply the conversation. My interpretation.
Right, but what I'm saying is, should we vote on this policy and then have that conversation? Because we haven't taken the vote yet.
I think so.
Okay. So if I could recommend that we take the vote on this policy and then move on to the conversation that was just described.
Thanks. We have a motion from Bowen, seconded by Miller, and hearing no further discussion, all in favor?
Bowen, aye.
Conry, aye.
Constantine, aye.
Elfenbein, aye.
Green, aye.
Miller, aye.
Thank you. That motion passes.
And did we just pass just the after school right now?
Yes.
Okay, so we
Right, because
just
that's the policy, but now we can have the conversation
I just want to make sure
about
I'm clear in the notes. Perfect.
Yep. So I would support, I don't know if you want like a straw poll or something like that, but I support expanding the application of this policy to in-school as described by the superintendent until we can vote at the June meeting on the regular policy.
I concur with that assessment.
Yep, I also agree.
I agree.
Agree.
I did take the liberty of speaking with the member that could not be here today, and totally understood that an individual can't weigh in when they're not here, but a move to grant me this very limited piece of authority for this specific issue would not run afoul of where that individual is, I don't believe.
Thank you.
I would also say it's important to understand that the way that our face coverings policy reads, it does not go away automatically at the end of the state of emergency, which is going to be upcoming unless things change, which we all hope they won't. So to pull away from the entire face covering policy will require another vote of the school committee at some point when it is appropriate to do so. It does not expire as some policies do at the conclusion of the state of emergency called by Governor Baker.
Thank you. Steve.
So do we need, and, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just
Steve
going to
can
say,
go
for the record, are we expecting that the state of emergency is expiring, I think, June 14th? Is that roughly?
Yes,
June 15th, I think. Isn't
I
it?
think it's the 15th.
Or 15th?
So do we need any clarification based on what you just said, Jake, about what applies and what doesn't apply as of now regarding the masking procedure at the schools, at all 3 schools?
I don't believe so, Carrie.
Okay.
No.
Okay. I don't see any other questions. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Bowen moves. Do I have a second?
Second.
Elfenbein seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Bowen, aye.
Conry, aye.
Constantine, I.
Elfenbein, aye.
Green eye.
Miller, aye.
Thank you. That motion passes. It is 12:23 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Go Bruins.